But I thought I'd start us off with talking about the different ways to put data into the system. And we'll maybe start with the quickest and easiest way, which is to directly edit records. Inside the Edit tab, inside the tool, we can see the tables that Conduit has. So this is the view of data that it knows from the outside world. And all of the records that are in there are in there. And some of these records on my site were created probably 7, 8 years ago. They've just been sitting there. These ones with these ID numbers that are 2, 4, and 5, just in case you didn't know, Moodle indexes with the database ID numbers for basically everything. Users, objects, courses, and so on. So ID number 2 means that this object, this course, was the second course built on the site. So that was a long time ago, because this site's probably goes back to 2010, something like that. So it's been around a while. Now, the beauty of having this table is that we can come in here and edit records, make changes, add additional details to the record to update what's going on. If I updated the template, I don't really know that that would work out terribly well for me. It might just wipe out the existing course. I wouldn't do that, I guess is what I would say. But the other values you can update. Creating a new short name will effectively create a whole new course. It's a key record value inside Moodle, which is why it's flagged as required over here. And so if I make that change to that record, it'll actually make a whole new class out of the existing course. So maybe a little bit of an unexpected outcome. Yeah, Kim, hit me with your question. And you can jump in on that audio or
oh, I'm sorry, I didn't unmute myself. I didn't quite hear what you said about the course template. What did you say about the course template name in the edit?
So, yeah, if I go in to edit a course record and I change the course template, I don't think that that's going to do anything, to be honest. It wouldn't change the outcome at all. But if it did, it would create a whole new course object, sort of orphaning the old one and creating a new one. But it's, in my mind, it would not change anything. It would not affect any real changes other than change the record in the database. And I'll show you why that would be the case right over here in the mappings. When we talked about the mappings, there are these 2 checkboxes, which are update Moodle every sync or update Conduit. Update Conduit says consume changes from Moodle and update the record in Conduit. It's kind of it's a bit of a strange thing to do, but you can do that. Or update Moodle every sync says pass any changes from Conduit into Moodle when I make that change. So if I do an update of the record, and this field is not checked, it doesn't update the thing in Moodle. It just updates it inside a Conduit. But I would have to check that setting to make sure that it pushed that update. Now, if I scroll all the way down to the template, those options aren't there. Because the template only happens the first time the course is made. There's no updating the template. Fundamentally, what I would do at that point is go into the course as an editing user and use the import tool to do what I would want to have done by changing the template. Or you can run a delete and delete the course, and then a new create and create it with a different template. Those are sort of the 2 choices that we got. Yeah, Jay.
Just Ed. So I go by Ed. Maybe I should change my name there.
Like, sure. Sorry about that. What can I do for you?
Now I'm going to forget what my question was. Oh, how about restore in that same context?
Yeah, restore would definitely do the same job. You can use the restore into function. Typically, I pitch import because it's just a bit of a cleaner workflow in some ways. You bypass the having to make a backup or something and so on. But if you've already got the backup, yeah, restore works perfectly. Yeah, and with the restore function, as an admin, you have the choice of overwriting the settings in the course with the backups settings, or merging the content from the backup into the course without changing the course's settings, which is what you would typically do in this scenario, right? You created a course shell through Conduit with the settings that you had intended it has, as far as like the name of the course and the short name and the start date and all that information. And then the backup and restore process, or the restore or the import, you're really just trying to get the content out of that object rather than the settings. Good questions. Because I really opened that up for some strange ideas there too. But fundamentally, what's great there is, again, with the user table, as in my example here, any of these fields that I have Conduit controlling, if I edit the field here in the tables, I affect that change on the record inside the system. It's an easy way to get a quick change processed through to a record. You've got a user that needs something really quickly. Some provost says, hey, I need to get access to the system, I want it now. Rather than go through some convoluted process, you can just grab the create new user option, fill out the user fields. These are just the fields that have been mapped inside the settings. Fill that out to match what you need it to match for that user. Again, you don't have to fill in all the blanks. External key doesn't really make a lot of sense in this context. The auth doesn't necessarily need to be in there as well, and so on, and just provide the details that you want to provide and hit save changes, and it'll process that user directly. It's a nice stopgap for something that you need to have get done now, is what it's really about. Of course, typically I'd want to process stuff from the SIS, but especially for those users that don't come from the SIS, it's a nice way to just get them in here as well. Yeah, Kim, did you have a question too? I think your mic is muted again, just in case. I'll run ahead, and yeah, Josh, it's funny. I go through cycles the same, where I use that edit tab a lot, and then I move away from it, and then I come back. But yeah, exactly, it can be really, really helpful. Oh, Kim, were you able to get in there with your question?
Yeah, I keep forgetting to unmute my mic. So in order to delete a user, do you have to suspend the user first? And I ask that because we have gone through the process of deleting some users, some instructors from courses, and because we needed to have a new instructor put there, and we couldn't get it to work unless we suspended them first.
You don't have to. Now, are we managing the enrollment for the user or getting rid of their account?
No, I'm sorry. We're just removing them from that course.
Yeah, just the enrollments.
Course.
Yeah, it should execute, but it's gonna depend on the settings, whether you've allowed it to manage all the enrollments or not, and what the source of their original enrollment was. So sometimes, and that's, enrollments get a little messy that way. Sometimes there's a manual enrollment that happens outside of the system.
Yeah, that was easy. This is the one that comes, that's no problem. But the one that is automatic enrollment through the, informal report and the Conduit, and it's automatic, then we have to go in here and edit it through Conduit.
Okay. That's interesting. Yeah, you should be able to do it without doing the suspension first.
Okay.
But it may be something funky with the settings. So we can take a look at the settings and see what makes sense there. Suspension is a nice way to kind of handle those if you need to, but you don't have to. And in fact, you should be able to come in and do things like bulk select some enrollments and then delete those enrollments directly out of the table, and that should transact the deletion of the event. Yeah, so if I grab those 4, it will remove those. Oh, but I know what that problem was, is that those enrollments were related to a course that got destroyed. So, so those enrollments are terrible, and that's why they're stuck in there. I gotta get those cleaned out someday. So, but it should be a pretty straightforward process. Yeah, suspension is nice on enrollments because it leaves the user visible in the course, but it's particularly for an instructor, it's not terribly useful always, but it certainly can be. What's nice with the suspension is that from the user experience, it's the same as being removed, but from the reporting experience, it leaves them visible in the reporting, but marked as suspended. Yeah, I like the sort of approach of using suspensions over removals as well, Summer. But I'm also, I have a Gmail mailbox with emails that go back to 2007 in my work mailbox. So, I'm that guy that just saves all that stuff. They never like it when we migrate systems, because then they have to back up all of my emails. But it's made it through the transfers back and forth a couple times. So create new is a way to build a new type of any of these records. So if I come in and say create new user, it gives me the mappings that I've done for the user records already. I can provide a username, an ID number, which is going to be required in my system because I've set the ID number to be the key record field on my site. If you didn't know the little trick, if you're using a Gmail-based mail system, you can do this little thing I've done here where you put a plus and some stuff between the email name and the @ symbol for your address, and it treats that as this. It basically just says hide all of this and work it the same as just without it. This would be a way to just manually insert a record. I know you guys all know how to log in as this big user I'm making. I name them in a way that helps me remember who they are. We'll just leave that. Since I don't need all those fields, I can just fill in the ones I'm interested in populating with data. So the transaction was completed. I can take a look at the report to see any information about the transaction. This is the refresher here, right? I get 2 records for each successful push because Conduit created it inside of its table. and then Moodle created it inside of Moodle. And so I get 2 successes. I know things work right. And yeah, it works. So this way is just an easy way to add individual records to the table. It's kind of handy. So if I head back to edit and I take a look at the user table, the last record in the user table should be and is, hey, look at that, this record, which is this fake user account that I just made. So there it is. It worked out pretty easy, relatively straightforward, and a nice way to manage that editing. So it's nice for one-offs. Obviously, you don't want to sit there and fill out that form, 5, 6, or 10, or 100 times. But it's nice to just execute that for a simple transaction, right? Some person needs an account right now, or a course right now. And they're not interested in waiting for the SIS to send over the details, or they're operating outside of the SIS, but you'd like to capture them in Conduit, because then you can manage them the same way going forward. Whatever the case may be, it's just easy to be able to insert those records, and it'll follow the same process that it does for all the other records of that type. One sort of more advanced approach then would be, we want to sort of step it up a notch from there, if you will, is if I head over to the mappings space, right? I've got all these fields mapped again. I've taken care of all these different fields for user records. I can download this header file and have that available to me as a way to upload a batch of users. So, for example, in my world, folks ask for a site that they're going to test for, say, an RFP or something like that. And I'll pull down that file on the site, put in 100 fake user records for them to use, and then load them through Conduit to create all the user records. So you get that CSV file, gives you all the headers that you need. You populate the columns with the data that you've got. It's pretty easy stuff to manage. And then you head over to the Operations tab. And in the Operations tab, you can drag and drop or browse to a file to upload records into the system directly. It's really good for small batches, just like you said. Yeah, it's small changes in small batches. You need to update a few records with some new details, whatever the case may be. I would be cautious of sending, really, frankly, the problematic spot is going to be creating new courses that are using some kind of template for the source, for the course, right? So if I send 100 or 200 or 1,000 users through this thing, it's not really going to be much of a problem. If I send 1,000 enrollments through here, I might have to wait a little bit. Enrolling takes a little while. It's a slower process than you might think. Mostly, there's a lot of cross-table indexing that's going on inside of Moodle. It takes a lot of time. But creating new courses as restores of existing courses, that's going to take, some significant amount of time. 20 seconds per course, maybe 10 seconds if it's small. But if you're doing hundreds of them, it's going to add up, and it's going to keep you on this page while that's happening. So you can't move off the page. The session might time out. And in fact, Josh, I think in my experience, 2 minutes per course is a pretty quick turnaround time on that. So I mean, you're gonna sit here and stare at the screen for a while. Try not to overload the system, and this is definitely for small changes. For courses, if I'm making a whole bunch of courses, I will use the SFTP tool plop it in the SFTP site. It can run in the background for half an hour and finish the job, whatever it's going to take, 2 hours. How many courses I'm building on that site. But it's definitely not the way to build lots of classes. But you can certainly send small changes. You can send changes to courses, right? So you could update, say, the visibility of courses through this pretty easy. That's a much slower or much faster process than creating courses from a backup file. So yeah, it's there. It's really good for those small incremental changes, like Ed was talking about, or managing, 1 or 2 courses, or 3 or 4 courses. Again, or if you feel comfortable with handing it a file and then knowing that the screen is just going to eventually time out on you at some point, and you don't care, that's fine too. but really, I would, if I was going to interpret the language that's here, where it's talks about you can upload some files, but up to a maximum of 100 megs, I would interpret that maybe more as you can upload several files here, but if you're running courses that are restoring from backups, it's going to time out. It's just going to happen. But it is a really handy way to get a quick batch of stuff through, particularly if you have like a spreadsheet roster of some enrollments that need to get executed for some courses that just got added to the schedule. Poof, you grab those, put them in that CSV file format with the headers that you downloaded from the mappings page, come back to that upload space, plop the file in there, and push go. It's pretty cool. If you were in the scenario that you had to maybe create about 100 new courses on demand, you were in a hurry, again, because that's a lot of courses, I would put that on SFTP, but you're in a hurry, so you're feeling like, but I don't want to wait for cron to run. There is this thing over here that allows you to push a button to execute cron now on Conduit. It doesn't run the full site's cron job, which is good, because I could get bogged down in processing forum posts and setting up notifications for grades and all kinds of other stuff. This is just the the Conduit tasks, the Conduit cron only. It's on its own job. If you push this button, it's going to lock you out from pushing the button again for a while, to keep you from spamming the run Conduit and clogging up the server and killing the jobs. So that's good. You just come in and you push it once, and eventually it'll process whatever it is you put up on the SFTP site. But again, this is, somebody says, we need these 100 courses today, right now. I mean, when I say today, now. So you go, okay, that's fine. Take the file, SFTP the file into the pickup spot, push this run now button, and Conduit will run right now. And then you can say, okay, great, the job's processing. I'll let you know when it's done. So you can feel like the hero without going to this upload tab and uploading that in there and then having it all kind of go sideways on you. So that's my suggestion and my advice there. The upload behavior works great for small changes, small batches, and simple jobs, but particularly course creation, not really the way to go. Speaking of the SFTP behavior, that's the stuff we'll get into kind of next here. There's a queue management function that was added in the release this summer, in the 3.8 release, and it's gotten a couple of enhancements or improvements to some of the behavior and the notifications around the behavior in the last couple of maintenance packs. But essentially what's happening here is that it's If you're running lots and lots of files at the same time, or several big files all at the same time, they'll wind up in a queue, right? They'll be getting processed in some slow process potentially. In this way, you can see what is waiting to get processed and what is being processed currently. My site has nothing in either because I'm not running that many files. And if I had a quarantine, I'd have some quarantine information about files that had a problem that got pushed off to the side. The process said, that file seems to be broken, something about it's not working, I'm just going to scroll it off in the corner. Yeah, that's probably some clever theming that somebody did with the text being white on white. That's not so good. If we built a custom theme for you, you could send it a support ticket for us to fix that in the custom theming. And if we didn't build a custom theme, you could ask in support and somebody might generously take a look at things and tell you what to do. And tell you what, if you want, and you didn't get a custom theme already, you can just send me a note and take a look and make some tweaks. The URL for my platform? Oh, or for Ed's. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Is that Doggo? Visitor 2? Yeah, I was like, I know who that is. That's Doggo. Dagoberto is my buddy. He's the other me who's doing all kinds of cool stuff. And he could fix that for you in a heartbeat, Ed. So if you shoot us the URL to the site in the text window, Ed, I bet Doggo will poof it away right now. So thanks. All right. So one of the things about the queue behavior is that it's really about processing, in my mind, that huge lump of stuff that comes just before the beginning of a term, right? Where you're batching in, tens of thousands of users, tens of thousands of enrollments, a couple thousand courses. Those jobs are huge, and they might consist of multiple files for each one of those sets of things even. And so queue management allows the system to create its own priority list for executing those jobs, but then I can come in and manage the queue and say, well, I think these jobs are a little bit more high priority. Preferentially, the system is going to execute users, then courses, or courses, then users, and do enrollments last, because enrollments act on users and courses. So the assumption is both of those jobs need to be finished for enrollments to make sense, because otherwise you get messages in there that say, you've asked me to enroll user X in course Y, and neither one of those exist. That's a very unsatisfying experience. I recognize that Conduit might eventually enroll that person once all those things are there, but it's one of those things that makes me feel like I gotta keep checking up on it. So this way, with the queue, I can see that it's processing those jobs the way I want them to get processed. If I know that I can reorder the prioritization in some way to get a job done that I need to get done quicker, then I can come in and manage the queue. Yeah. I don't imagine a lot of scenarios that you're going to really need to get into there. But it is nice to be able to view it and have the information about what's in progress, where the jobs are right now, and what jobs are in the queue to get done next. I like that part. It makes me feel like, I can see what's going on, even though things aren't happening yet. So that's the way I interpret all of that stuff. So that's enough about that, I think. One of the things I'll mention here too is the The settings space in the Files tab underneath Settings is where I can see that SFTP directory. So this is where, through SFTP, I would go to find the folder where my files live. I've got a quarantine behavior that's going to quarantine my files into a subdirectory for quarantine. So if a file is broken, if it's causing problems, it's got a corruption in it, it'll get squirreled away in the corner there. And then just to bring up something jazzy that's a new feature is, you specify the name of the file that's coming over, right? And it's always auth CSV or user CSV or whatever the file name is. But now there's a feature that allows you to use wildcards in the naming. So if you've got a job from the student information service that creates a file that maybe has a date or some kind of index number attached to the output, you can use the wildcard in the name to create the option for variability there, right? So if it makes auth today's date and time .csv, I can say auth star .csv, and poof, it will process everything. The tool also includes the ability to use a question mark in the wildcard behavior. The question mark would be where I would specify a specific number of characters to be accepted in the wildcard behavior as opposed to any arbitrary string. So star, I would process anything that started with auth and ended with .csv, regardless of how many characters or symbols are in there. With what I've typed in now with 4 question marks, I would accept auth 2020. or maybe my example might make more sense if I said auth 2 characters for month, 2 characters for day, and then 2020 after, because I was expecting the file to match that format precisely. It gives me more control over what the expectation of the naming is, and in this way, I'm not accepting just any arbitrary values in there. It has to match the structure that I've defined now. But on the other hand, if the auth file came in and it only had 1 character for the day instead of 2, it wouldn't match. So it, it allows for a degree of precision in the naming for the wildcards. Personally, I feel like if I've already gone into the world of allowing the name to be somewhat arbitrary, then I've already kind of gone in there. so it's okay. But that option is available. It's particularly helpful if you've got a process that creates files that are not the same name every single time. There's a little write-up down here at the bottom that explains how that works, and the notation in here. It's really pretty cool. From my perspective, I've more than a few times helped create scripts that took a file and trimmed off the garbage that didn't need to be there, that was always changing, or just replaced the file name with a standardized file name. And this way, you don't necessarily need to get into that now. You can't just say the user file is star, because every single file that goes up there that is the CSV match that. So it's not actually going to work out for you, but this works out really well. There's a distinguishing attribute about the file that tells it that will be some user data, but allows for some variability of what the rest of the details are. Yeah, it's brand new. I think the last maintenance pack or 2, but super random. But it's pretty cool, and it was on our wish list from like 12 years ago. So poof, It is in there. So yeah, it's a cool new feature, an excellent change, and nice modification to the behavior overall. I think it adds a lot of value for folks that have systems that create indexed files. It allows you to make room for that indexing. Web services in settings is the other way to bring in data. So we got the SFTP files up, and then we also have web services that allow you to transact records through a web service. This is an optional checkbox in the settings, but in reality, there are 0 circumstances where you would be allowed to not send this message in HTTPS. You're sending like user record information, so it should be using a secure transport layer. You can define a token for the handshake. I say you can. You have to define a token for the handshake. Essentially it's a password, right? You're creating a password for the handshake so that we all know I should listen to what you've got to say when you send a message to me. Treat it as a password, right? So it should be strong. It should be secured. And again, since we're posting it through the web, it has to go through the secure transport layer. IP addresses, you can specify a specific IP address or a range of IP addresses that messages will be accepted from. If you've got a fixed IP address on your web front that all messages would be coming from, for example, or you've got an IP address that or IP address range that your student information system might be communicating from, it's nice to lock that down. Just be aware that when you're doing that and those change, you gotta keep up with the change. Gracias, Dago. Thank you. Thanks for taking care of that, my friend. The structure is pretty standard for IP addresses. It's pretty straightforward stuff. I'm not using it on my site, mostly because my site's pretty low stakes. I mean, I'm not too worried about it. But for you, it's probably a good consideration. There's probably somebody at the university or the college that's very concerned with security that would be really happy to know that you set a fixed IP range for communications. Yeah, we'll leave it at that. And then there are all the endpoints for all the different jobs. So courses has its endpoint, enrollments has its endpoint, users has its endpoint, and so on. So you send messages about specific types of objects to the specific handler for that kind of message. It's pretty cool. It's very nice to be able to set things up like that. It allows you to manage changes in real time. I tend to think of a typical workflow being the sort of beginning of the year or even the beginning of the term batch files with large groups of transactions that set the baseline for the architecture of what things look like for the next term. And then web services can come in to do the sort of day-to-day operational changes. So drop that class, this person changed the name, that instructor got reassigned, whatever the case may be. But for those sort of smaller transactional jobs, the web services can be really nice. One thing to consider too is that the web services could be designed to operate from like a website. So say you're using Joomla or WordPress or something for your website, you can have a sign up page in that space where people fill out a form. Form submission triggers a script that packages the form in an XML message and posts it to Conduit to create a user record and an enrollment for a user who just signed up for something. So it's a really nice way to kind of create a clean workflow for that sort of stuff. Could be really cool for pre-orientation packages, right? Students that are coming in that need to know the stuff about what they need to do when they get here before the, the beginning of the year. That way they can go in before they're in the SIS, sign up to get a preview of the information that they're going to need to know, things like that. If you'd like, I can show a working example of the web services connector. I use a little tool called Boomerang in my web browser to just send post messages. There's like, I don't know, an endless number of ways to kind of approach these sort of ideas of what to build. But essentially, we have different kinds of requests that can go through. Say, create a course. I can send a course creation message over that will trigger the creation of a course. What does this course look like? Oh, I haven't run it yet. That's why. Let's take a preview. Okay. It's not going to work today. Well, all right. Let's see what it's sending over just to make sure it looks good. There's a whole huge section of the documentation that talks about the structure of these and what you're building. When you send those messages over, I'm going to index this thing up manually here. just to amuse myself. So I'm just creating some course here with some arbitrary values in this web service transaction. What I use this for is validating the configuration of settings. And you'll notice here, right, it takes a little time to run this. I'm creating a course from restore action, right? I'm using a template on that course. So it's actually churning away here like some butter and taking its sweet time to build it. But it came back with a success message. So it said it did it. Things look like they worked. Let's take a look at the response. Looks like it was good. So it accepted the message and successfully created it without throwing any errors back at me, it looks like, which is great. If I wanted to know for sure that it worked, oops, clicked on the wrong tab there, I could take a look at this messaging and, oh, look at that. It handled a course creation message from me, and the response was okay. And it built a course using that ID number that I specified. Right? So it's kind of a nice proof of concept engine. It's a nice way to kind of experiment and make sure that you're building these things out. Yeah, and I think we could have a session to get into that from the workflow from the page, but essentially all you're really going to do is have the web page for the sign up send a post message like this to the site to provide that information. There's some obfuscation layers that you're going to want to engage in the process. You want to make sure that things that are right. I'm posting the token for my site right here in this transaction. So a clever person could potentially see that if I put it in the web page directly. So what I'm going to want to do is have a call that fetches the token and inserts it into the post message as it goes off, rather than just say, post string with token, it's blah, 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 on submit. So yeah, not to get too deep in the weeds, but you're going to want to make sure you write things correctly so that things aren't hidden. Yeah, and there's a lot of cool ways to handle orientations, and part of it really depends on where in the flow of enrollment to registration students appear in the student information system. I am a fan of, if they're appearing in the information system and I can transact them into the OpenLMS environment ahead of, say, course registration or things like that, it's really cool to be able to create their account early. You can put that account in a cohort. Cohort is mapped inside of Conduit now, so you can actually specify cohorts for users. So you could put the user into new student orientation cohort and have that automatically enroll them into appropriate courses for them, right? So they might take a campus orientation course and a using the LMS course before the term even starts, right? They get access to that right away. So it's kind of cool. And in fact, if you wanted to get really fancy with it, you could think of doing a series of orientation courses where the first one is triggered based on either you directly enrolling them or, say, some sort of cohort style enrolling them into the course to do it first orientation, and then when they complete that course, the personalized learning designer could trigger a cascade of secondary enrollments that happen because they complete other courses or choose something inside of the first course that then says, oh, well, they're interested in sports and hobbies on the campus, so we're going to trigger an automatic enrollment into a course about signing up for those special interest groups. But you can do all kinds of crazy cool things inside the LMS that would automate and streamline that sort of process of giving students access to information about the campus. Is pretty cool. You could actually, if it required something from a third-party vendor. It depends on how you're passing it back and forth, but yeah, absolutely, including things like LTI. Yeah, totally. Yeah, I like to invent lots of really neat ways to do things and then let other people do this. But no, I tease. And we could totally get together and work on some of those ideas if it makes sense. I'm happy to queue up a meeting where we can come up with some plans. Yeah, and Dago, the pay for access is also a really easy workflow. If you didn't know, there's a PayPal plugin that's available in the platform that you could just do for PayPal transactions to have students transact themselves into the course. There's also the option to use both PayPal and secondary enrollment methods. So some students could come in as paid access to the course, and others could be automatically enrolled in the course from all sorts of different sources simultaneously. So there's a lot of flexibility and power in all of that. Yeah. Cool. From the web services side of things, just to really round out the thoughts on web services, there are also what we call get methods. And get methods are ways to get data back from the system. So rather than ask for the system to create something, I can get a package of information back from the system. Using it inside of this tool, maybe not the most convenient way to get access to this data. As you can see, I asked for grades. And since I asked for course grades, as you can see there, the course grades means that I'm getting the grade from the course for every single user in the course. I did use in the settings, hopefully, I asked for just the course grades and not the modules grades, because that could get even more complicated. But there are multiple ways to fetch data out of the system through Conduit. They're really designed for integrations with portals. Illusion's ILP is one of the systems that uses a fair number of these to grab data out of the platform and present it to the user. And so that really gives you some cool ways to get at data. If you're building student portals, if you've got somebody in the campus that's building student portals all the time, Conduit a whole series of web service transaction calls that you can use to get at that data about the student. Right? What's due in my classes, what classes am I enrolled in, presenting links to courses, grade information, all kinds of stuff can be transacted out of the system and into a portal. There's a whole section of the documentation focused on the web service layer and what kind of calls are available and what to expect as responses and how to unpack them and all that kind of stuff. I'm not going to dive too deep into those, but the get methods are the ways to get data, and the handle methods are the ways to create, update, and delete records through the web services. So there's kind of two different streams of information: the handles to build stuff or manage records, and the get methods to fetch information in the system. The one advantage of using the get methods to grab grades is that the get method uses the gradebook logic to determine what the user sees of their grade rather than the raw score from the database, which could be manipulated pretty significantly by the gradebook before the user sees it. Well, I was going to say, yeah, there's a clear list of the handles that are supported, but in fact, I don't know that I would say the documentation is clear, but that's a bit subjective. But I'll tell you what, let's head on over to the support system, and I've got a fake user that they gave me that I could use here. But if you haven't checked it out, in the guides space, there's a whole section of new documentation that's been put together on Conduit. And it has all sorts of stuff in there, but let's click on the C to 16 articles, and let's check out somewhere in here. There's going to be one that has the web services. I probably shot right past it. Up copy from one site to another, log retention, troubleshooting, somewhere in here. Spending data. Yeah, there we go. RESTful web services. Scroll through here. So there are some examples of the handle actions. I guess I will say I feel like this documentation could probably use some help. But it's getting the job done, but it's not getting the job done super elegantly. But if you do run into some questions as you're driving through any of this stuff, you could ask support, or you could just bypass and ask me. I'll tell you what I would tell them. It's all cool. Let's see, there are not handles, or these are only the handles. These are not the get methods. Maybe the new docs don't have the get methods yet. Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Dago. Yeah, so again, those handles are the making records and managing existing records. And the get methods are for fetching data. Maybe I should take the task to unpack the help docs and restructure the get methods into something that seems more usable. That's not telling me anything. We used to call it like examples. Oh yeah, there it is. There we go. So in here somewhere, yeah, here's the basic structure. right? So this explains at a very broad level what the structure looks like, right? Declaring an XML package, I've got data and some datum. The datum includes then the action, so create, update, delete, or get. No, actually, yeah, the get is defined in the preamble. And then I define the datums, right? So I put in the mapping and the value that I'm doing. So for this handle example, I have a handle, I say create, update, delete, and then I have the mappings that I'm interested in sending in there. And I'm sending it to an endpoint that defines where the message, what kind of message this is, right? So I send it to the user endpoint to transact changes against users. I send it to the courses endpoint to transact messages about courses and so on. It's nice that it's containerized that way because it makes it really easy to be certain that you're sending the right message to the right place. And then down here are the get methods. So these are each of the different get methods is laid out in this space, and it's laid out based on the web service endpoint. So users, these are the get methods that act on users. Then a little further down, and you can see this page is pretty long, I'll get to courses endpoint and enrollments endpoint, groups endpoints, and all that kind of stuff. I don't know that there are any group get methods, actually. I think they're just users and courses and grades. So each one of these get methods then belongs with a particular web service class, user web service class, get user course activities due. Return to me a list of the activities that are upcoming due dates for this specific user. I have to pass token, method, the user, and the date that I'm interested in going out to. So I could say, the date of next month or the date of next Monday, whatever range of time I want to display due dates for. And then I could optionally specify a specific course for the user get method to return data on, or I could leave it blank and then, or unpopulated, and then it would just assume that I want due dates for every course that this user is enrolled in. These are really powerful, and there's a lot of cool stuff that you can do with them, but it takes a little finagling to get in there. But I mean, it does work, right? Like over here, I've got a huge package with all of the grades from a specific course that I've targeted to get all the grades. I could also target a user and get their grades across all their courses, for example. There's all kinds of those in there. If it's not in this space yet, it probably will be getting there soon. Oh, thank you, Dago. The most relevant ones, and that's actually almost all of them. I've just at a glance. Okay, there is a group target. Oh, that's awesome. So I can get back from the system what groups a user is enrolled in a course. That's pretty useful. Yeah, so back to your original question, Josh. I don't know that this would be clear, but it is a relatively complete set of information about the get methods. It just takes a bit of waiting to get through there. Right, so it gives me examples of all the data that's available. It gives me, so here's what a structured response would look like. Here's what a structured response with results in it would look like for this kind of query, and so on. And that's a lot of why this thing takes so much space, is that it's a pretty detailed document. If you're gonna get into the weeds into some of these web service transactions, or you got someone who wants to kick off a project or complete a project to present information to students somewhere else in the web space of the campus, feel free to reach out and let me know. I can always join some calls and help people kind of navigate the documentation. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. It's pretty cool stuff. It gets kind of complicated pretty fast. So there you go. Any other questions on those web services? It was a lot of information to take in, and I tried not to go too deep into it, but you can certainly go deeper if you got it. No. Yeah, I think that's a fair response. And it's a lot of stuff to take in. If you're needing to prove that web services work, or you need to get in and experiment with them at all, tools like Boomerang, there's loads of other ones out there, can help you build a proof of concept. If you're having trouble getting the web services to work, the documentation may or may not explain to you what it is that you need to do differently. So, I think the docs work great when you know what you're doing. And I think the docs maybe don't quite need you at the, I don't know what any of this means level, or I think I know what this means, but I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong level, is where I think it really can try to have a little harder to meet you at. One of the things I'll point out as sort of our wrapping up moment there, I talked about in these docs where there are all these messages that can come in, right? So the documentation in the new help site gives you detailed information on what all of the different error messages mean. That's really cool. And if you didn't know, over here on the information tab, there's a section that basically reads out all those same things, but not nearly as nice looking. So, so it's better formatted with, you might notice the sort of slightly more human readable layout and a slightly more human understandable version of the answer to what these things are. And these messages apply to the web services as well as to the file transactions or the direct edits. So whenever you get a message that tells you an error, you can try to understand the error on your own, or you can open up that documentation and see what the documentation explains about the error. To use this example, the simple version of understanding what this validation error is it says failed to validate errors. What failed to validate means that there was something about the message to create a record that didn't come out as correct to Conduit's taste. And then it specifies missing value for a required field ID number. And that's because if we glance through the message that I sent, there was a value that was mapped as ID number, but I had changed in Conduit the mapping to be a different field name. So I was sending ID number, and it was expecting student ID number, or whatever I put in. So then it said, oh, well, you sent me some value that's not mapped, right? It says not mapped this thing. But also, I was expecting there to be a field that's required that wasn't here. So you're broken. And so that's how you wind up kind of processing this information. Hopefully they make sense. But if they don't, that's where I think this documentation can come in handy, right? Is you can come in and kind of try to, these docs are here to try to make more sense of those messages. But of course, support's always there too. So anyway, I think that's everything I was going to cover. I feel like I've stretched it about as far as I feel like is reasonable for today, unless people really want to dive into something more. I'm more than happy to dive into those things, but I don't want to trap you in this room listening to me talk for another 20 minutes without really any reason. So hopefully you got something valuable out of that, and hopefully it gives you a little confidence to test these things out. I think playing with the web services is really kind of an interesting experiment. It gives you a lot to work with. You've got a sandbox site that you can target with these kind of things to test out. And don't forget, you can always use the import-export functions to move settings from one site to another once you've got settings tuned the way you want them to. So you could go to the sandbox, take an export package of the settings from the production environment, load them in the sandbox so they're set up the same way, test out some web services or test out some new file processing behaviors on the sandbox, and then know that they're going to work on the production environment because the settings were the same between the two. So have fun, experiment, enjoy it, you know, have a glass of eggnog and you know, do something fun. Yeah, I'm glad you had some good times there today, and I'll stick around, but I release you back to the wild. Go enjoy your days. Have a little bit of extra time back, and I appreciate you spending some time talking about crazy things with me. Thank you. Adago, yeah, thank you. Thanks for helping out. Appreciate it.